Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening, and I just love hearing about how you settle down to listen to my stories. And it's incredible from how many different parts of the world you all are from, and it's very, very exciting to hear all that. And I do send each and every one of you loads and loads of love, and I hope you're doing exceedingly well. But before we settle down, the story tonight is very interesting because it comes from a lady who is in fact a famous author from the 1980s period. And she doesn't want to give her details about who she is because she is famous. But she did have a Bigfoot encounter, which you're going to find really fascinating. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. My name is Petunia. It's not really, of course, but for the purposes of this story, I do fancy a rather flowery name for myself. I do need to remain anonymous because I'm a very well-known novelist from the 80s period, which means I'd like my letters to contain as little factual details as possible. I would like to admit such details like where I'm from, and even the place where I actually had my Bigfoot encounter, which occurred in the spring of 1987. I've always been a prolific writer, much to the delight and enthusiasm of my publishers, as the ideas would just flow like a never-ending stream of gushing water. That is, unfortunately, when the creative sparkle in my life just suddenly diminished in the January of 1987, and this means I just hit a brick wall and simply could not write anymore. The term for this is known as writer's block, and for the first time in my life, I literally found myself being hounded and harassed by my publisher, telling me to get a move on with my story. But try as I might, I simply could not put pen to paper, much to my great consternation. I remember one morning in January, when it was very cold and chilly out there, and the previous evening we had actually had some frozen rain, sleet and snow. It was then that I decided I would gallantly brace the elements and take my 4-month-old German Shepherd for a walk. In my experience, nothing gets the creative juices flowing more than a walk and fresh air, and at this stage I was so desperate I was willing to try anything to get that inspiration going. My imagination had become as dry as a barrel, a colossal-sized stumbling block for any aspiring novelist, let me assure you. Bear in mind that I live in a residential area where the neighbours are not too far apart, and I'm fortunate enough to live in a pretty cul-de-sac with beautiful terraced gardens, perfectly manicured hedges, and lawns with bountiful beds bursting with colourful blooms in every available colour, from pinks to lilacs, yellows, reds and oranges. I proceeded to walk my shepherd puppy, who was a little anxious of experiencing this brand new world outside our safe little property, with the seemingly endless lawns of green grass, unusual smells, and the sounds of dogs barking everywhere. I went over to our neighbour's friendly white husky and introduced him to my little Juno through the large white steel gate, and the encounter was a lot more aggressive than I had envisaged. I hastily guided Juno away from the excitable, temperamental dog, who was now barking furiously. I scurried away, guiltily aware that I had probably awoken the entire neighbourhood at the early hours of the morning, with this huge raucous commotion, but things were about to get a lot worse. Suddenly I went skidding and skating down the concrete embankment, and reached out with my right hand to break the fall. I luckily landed on my bum, but my wrist did not escape the harrowing effects of the nasty fall. I let out the most horrendous, agonizing scream, because the pain I was experiencing was like nothing I have ever experienced in my life, as excruciating shooting pains and terrible throbbing aches engulfed my entire body. I knew I'd broken my wrist badly, but visually seeing this gruesome, disturbing sight of my limp hand dangling off the end of my wrist, with a little sinew and jagged bone protruding from the convoluted flesh, was even more terrifying than the pain itself. I howled in absolute agony, hoping that I had awakened one of my neighbours, but my scream was not answered and was met with still silence, and no help came. Everything was remarkably quiet, apart from little Juno, who was now whimpering at the sight of my pathetic, sorry state, crumpled on the ground like a scrunched-up piece of paper. Bear in mind I was unmarried, so by the time I scampered back to my home with piteous tears rolling down my cheeks, I called the emergency services and was rushed to hospital for immediate medical attention. All the while Juno was placed in the care of an elderly neighbour. When I checked in at the hospital, they gave me a slight anaesthetic to straighten my wrist, and a few days later I had a major operation on my wrist where they used metal rods to straighten it. I want to tell you that that week that followed after my surgery was one of the most physically painful of my entire life. 20 years prior to this fall, I had broken my left wrist on a trampoline accident, but the pain was not anything near as close to as excruciating as this was. I knew I'd not be able to put pen to paper for a few weeks now, much to the frustration of my publisher, who now knew with an absolute certainty that I would not deliver the goods as far as my writing was concerned. Suddenly she had an inspirational, ingenious idea. "Why do you not go and spend a couple of weeks at my holiday cabin in Oregon?" she suggested. "It's in a very remote area, but I'll get Tilly to keep an eye on you and cook you all your meals. She's a brilliant housekeeper, you see, and lives on the smaller cabin on the land. If you cannot manage with your wrist, I could get Tilly to move in with you, and she can help you take care of little Juno by giving him some brisk walks on your behalf, until you get your strength back, of course. Your whole body has been through a traumatizing shock, and it needs plenty of time to heal." It took me a while to warm up to the idea, but I knew my publisher was right. Maybe a break was exactly what I needed to reinvent myself as a writer and come home fresh and inspired from my break. It was certainly better than staying at home all cooped up and feeling very sorry for myself. And if I needed any help, Tilly would be there. As for Juno, he would be in heaven in this idyllic countryside. What was there not to like about this amazing idea, I wondered. So there it was. I was to arrive at my publisher's cabin, and I did, and boy was I blown away. She had understated how idyllic and bucolic the location actually was. The log cabin looked as if it had come out of a high-class country living magazine. The Scandinavian-style log cabin had seamless, glorious finishes. It boasted magnificent golden floors, floating staircases, and large glass windows throughout the whole house, literally overlooking the most magnificent views over the rolling green valleys and the tranquil silvery lake. In the distance I could see the magnificent resplendent forest that seemed to stretch back for miles upon miles, and the best thing about this 300-acre property was that it was all privately owned by my publisher. Inside the cabin no expense had been spared. There were large comfy white sofas throughout, as well as a gloriously large stone fireplace and a sumptuous cosy bedroom that was fit for a king, with a killer bed laden with soft white duvets and plenty of feathered pillows. Tilly the housekeeper was from Ireland and had one of those sweet soft Irish accents, and boy did this woman love to bake and cook, from stew and dumplings to all manner of Irish steam puddings, from spotted dick to jam roly-poly, and not forget my favourite, sticky toffee pudding. "Look at you," she said in horror. "Look at you. You're all skin and bones. But once you've had some fresh air, we'll get some meat on your bones and some good Irish cooking into that wafer-thin body of yours. By the time I've finished feeding you up, you'll be rolling out of here," she chuckled. I was still in dreadful agonizing pain, let's not kid, with my wrists, but managing to keep the pain at bay with very strong painkillers that did have the tendency to make me feel sleepy, sluggish, and lethargic, but I knew that this was part of the inevitable recovery journey. I suddenly felt happier than I'd been feeling for quite a long time, and it was so lovely to be breathing in this fresh, crisp mountain air and watching all the deer gathering at the lake. It didn't get better than this, I thought. "I cannot wait to explore the whole area," I said to Tilly. "It's magnificent out here." "Mind you keep away from the forests. That's the hairy man's domain, and he won't thank you for venturing on his turf," she warned me. "Who's the hairy man?" I asked Tilly. But she didn't answer me because she was making a caramel syrup and was watching the sugar ever so carefully in case it burnt. I imagined the hairy man to be a homeless vagrant living in the forest who was grumpy and bad-tempered with a short fuse. I'd seen enough cantankerous men in my whole life, and I knew how to deal with them superbly, even if I say so myself. My grandfather growing up had been the most grouchy, crotchety person you could ever hope to meet, but I always managed to win in his favour with a few crafty techniques all of my own. So I truly thought dealing with this somewhat peevish, crusty, hairy man would inevitably be a piece of cake. After all, I had a lifetime of experience behind me. As a writer, Tilly warning me off exploring the forests of the hairy man was more like a green light for me, because when I write my novels, I love basing them on real-life eccentric and crusty characters that I've been fortunate enough to meet in my life. So whoever this hairy man was, I was eager to meet him. I had visions of a man with long white hair and long wiry beard who lived in a dishevelled old tent and lived off the land. So one day Juna and I ventured into the forest. I wanted to meet the hairy man for myself, and so I decided to bring him a basket of Tilly's delicious supplies, which included Irish soda bread, homemade strawberry jam, Irish shortbread, and the basket was so heavy with all this lovely stuff that I was carrying, but luckily I was using my left hand because my right hand was plastered and needed to be left well alone. As I ventured into the forest, shafts of beautiful sunlight danced through the open areas of the forest canopy, creating streams of pretty white light on the floor, causing all the green leaves to sparkle like yellow gold jewels, and it was ever so lovely to look at. As I walked, I crushed the pine needles beneath my feet, which gave the forest this gorgeous, fragrant scent of Christmas. It really was a fantastically enchanting day, and I felt incredibly delirious with happiness to be alive, and so relieved to no longer be suffering from the relentless hounding pain of my wrist injury, which thankfully had started to subside. I was surprised to see how quiet the forest seemed, and there was no sign of life absolutely anywhere. I did not come across any rabbits darting in and out of their burrows, or pretty little squirrels dancing from one branch to another. Neither did I hear any cheerful bird tweets. It all seemed very odd and strange, but nothing was going to stop me from enjoying this lovely, almost perfect day, nor was there anything that would hold me back. Not a single chance of that. I wanted to see, taste, smell, and breathe it all. As an author, you need to feel everything you recreate in your writing so that those memories from your experiences can be painted in your words, like an artist paints colours onto canvas. It's all an expression of life. Suddenly I sensed in every core of my being that I was being watched, and I could feel steel eyes on me, although I could not see them anywhere. I knew suddenly that I was not alone, and I felt this incredible, dreadful sense of foreboding. I know of no other way to describe it. Poor little Juno was far from happy. I could see his ears were standing up and his tail was tucked between his legs, and he was making the strangest yelping cry. I knew that he wanted to leave as much as I did. I noticed a little teepee in the forest that was made from timber posts that had been stacked over each other haphazardly. I looked inside the structure and I saw a nest which was neatly strewn with bones in one area, and I could smell a foul odour of damp dog-like skunk, all mixed together. What on earth was this structure, I wondered, peering inside it curiously. I'd never seen anything so peculiarly bizarre in all my life. It looked like some kind of a home or a hut. Suddenly I heard the most terrible growl that caused the whole ground to literally shake and vibrate. It was a horrifying sound, and it caused my entire body to shake violently. My stomach was literally in knots, and I began to feel the most dreadful nausea rising in my throat, and my head started to pound violently with what appeared to be the warning signs of an ominously bad migraine attack. I dropped my basket, and all the contents of food fell onto the ground in a haphazard heap, but I didn't care. I so badly wanted to run, and that was all I could think about in that moment. But I was incapacitated by a compounding fear that literally caused my body to freeze over like a massive block of ice. I could see this gargantuan black shape moving between the branches. It was like a shadowy form in the tree line that swayed from one side to another, watching me ever so closely, but always remained hidden from my sight. Whatever this thing was, I knew it was colossal and monstrous in size, and it definitely was a treacherous savage beast. Of that I was certain. I knew it could pounce on me and devour me in any moment. I had observed all those mauled and cleanly stripped animal bones lying in neat piles on the teppee, and I was fully aware that I could be next on his dinner menu, as far as this vicious, menacing beast was concerned. Suddenly I could feel this burst of adrenaline surging and rising through my body like powerful strongs of palpable currents of electricity. And then I found myself running and racing as fast as I could through the forest, with Juno running behind me. I promise you, I have never ever run like that before. And I knew in my gut that the worst thing you could possibly ever do when it comes to a predator is run away from it. But I could not suppress that desperate urge to escape this gruesome, evil, jumbo-sized beast. I was surprised that the creature was not charging behind me, or in hot pursuit of me like a lion, which I thought was exceedingly odd for a dangerous predator. Maybe he had eaten his full share of prey today, and was not hungry enough to add me to his dinner plate on this occasion, I thought. I never told Tilly about my strange experience in the forest and my search for the hairy man, because she had warned me off going there in the first place. I was sad that I had not encountered the grumpy, cantankerous man, because it would have been very interesting to have met him, good for my novels and my research as well. But there was no way on God's earth I'd go back into that forest again, even if you paid me £1 million. Not with that dangerous predator out there loitering around like a bad smell. The following day I was sitting on the wooden deck that enveloped itself snugly around our cabin, with Tilly and I sipping hot tea and eating Irish scones with jams and clotted cream. "This is the life," I said to Tilly. "It's magnificently enchanting out here." "You're not wrong, lassie. It's more beautiful than Ireland, and that's saying something coming from me, because I love the Emerald Isle more than life itself, because she is my motherland. But this place just cannot be beaten." Suddenly I noticed that Juno had been lying by my feet, was now sitting hunched up and growling furiously. Then I saw him, this dark, shadowy movement coming from the forests, and he walked towards us and turned my stomach cold. Walking through the tree line was an enormous apex predator, the likes of such that I have never seen before. The creature was gargantuan, at about 8 feet tall and at least 800 pounds. This must have been the creature who was shadowing me yesterday, I thought, and he was more terrifying in the flesh than I ever imagined or even anticipated. His whole body was covered in thick, dark, sensuous brown hair, apart from the face that was completely hairless and covered in grey thick skin, with a protruding brow ridge, thin lips, and a very dark, flat nose. The creature was humanoid and bipedal, with a very definite primate look to it, and its arms were so long that the creature would not have had any difficulty touching his ankles while standing totally straight. I noticed the creature was carrying Tilly's basket in his human-like hands that I had dropped yesterday in the forest, which he appeared to be returning, which was most odd for a creature as formidable as this one. We watched the creature park the basket at the cabin door, and then walk away on long, slender legs, taking 5-foot strides as he moved, while he swung his arms backwards and forwards, and he moved with incredible fluid grace. What's the hairy man doing here?" asked Tilly, looking aghast. "And what's he doing with my basket?" "Is that the hairy man?" I asked in horror. "But he's not human." "You went into the forest, didn't you?" said Tilly. "Did I not warn you to leave the hairy man alone? He doesn't like to be bothered. He's a loner that keeps himself to himself, and he doesn't like to be disturbed." "I thought you were talking about a hillbilly living on the land. I didn't actually think I'd run into King Kong," I said. "Oh, you thought the hairy man was human," laughed Tilly. "It looks like you got off lightly, because he can have a hell of a temper on him. He doesn't take kindly to strangers, but maybe your pretty face softened his heart. I think he might just have a soft spot for a pretty young thing like yourself. Perhaps there is a kink in his armour after all, she giggled. Maybe our hairy man has a fluttering heart, she teased. I then told Tilly about the terrifying ordeal I'd actually had in the forest with the hairy man. I thought he was going to kill me, I told her. Kill you? Laughed Tilly. Never in a million years. Chase you out of the forest, definitely, but kill you, never. What kind of a creature is he? I asked Tilly. I've never ever seen one like him before. I'm not sure, she said, but he's been around here for a very long time, and he keeps himself to himself and never bothers anyone. He regards the forest as his domain, and we've always respected that as long as we've lived here. He does respect our space, much as we respect his. It's always been that way for as long as I can remember. Are there others like him? I asked. Oh, yes, he does have a female companion and a wee little one, which they are very protective over and very proud of. That pair have been together for years. They're as thick as thieves, the two of them, and they have a very strong, powerful family unit. You mean they're monogamous? Oh, definitely, she said. You seem fascinated by the creature. I am, I said. I never imagined something so scary and terrifying to be so human-like and normal. Well, he is very smelly, laughed Tilly. He rarely could do with a bath, but he rolls in the mud all the time. I think he does that to ward off the bugs, but by golly does he stink. You always know when he's been around, because the place smells so rank. I often find him in the strawberry beds, and he smells. I retrieved the basket from the door and was surprised to see that it was filled with freshwater trout from the lake. Oh, my word, laughed Tilly. The hairy man brought you a present. You must have made an impression on him. I think he has a soft spot for you after all. Did I not tell you? She giggled. He never brought me trout as long as I've lived here, for many long years. Well, I thought the hairy man was human, didn't I said. So I brought him some of your baked goodies into the woods in that basket, and then I dropped them in fear when I came across that creature that I saw shadowing me in the woods, which just so happened to be the hairy man himself. Oh, so you brought him some of my stuff as a gift? Well, I thought it was a real live hairy man vagrant in the woods. The hairy man made such an impression on me because he was an apex predator that had terrified me half to death, but there was a whole other side to him that was actually endearing and almost gentle. I could hardly believe it. During the rest of my stay at my publisher's cabin, I continued to gift the creature with Tilly's homemade delights, but I always left the goodies outside the forest as a sign of respect, and never ventured inside. The hairy man would always gift us with trout from the lake. Sometimes it was a leg of venison, a deer skin, or even a couple of dead rabbits, much to Tilly's delight, because she loved making rabbit stew from one of her Irish recipes. When I returned home 8 weeks later, my writer's block had all but vanished. I was full of new inspirational ideas, and I began to produce several bestsellers, the best ever, at the time because of my encounter with the hairy man, which seemed to enhance my creative juices in ways that I never imagined possible. So there you are, that's my story. By the way, it was only in 2007 that I actually learnt that the hairy man that I met in the woods was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, and I realised how fortunate and privileged I was to see one of these at close range, because I gather many people would dream to be in my shoes. Well, that was just such a fabulous story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us, and I do think that the hairy man does inspire our creative juices. I think we may go off to work feeling happier because we've had a story from the hairy man. Somehow I think he's impacted our lives in more ways than we imagine. He certainly has impacted mine. Until next time, goodbye and good night.